Good morning, everybody. My name is Sangori from Department of Marine Business and Economics, College of the Fishery Science, Pugyong National University, Busan, Korea. Today lecture about the Korean fisheries, aquaculture, and policies. And the fisheries in Korea was very important industries when Korean economic development in first stage in 1950 and 60. So that times this industry was very important roles to develop the Korean local economics. So today lectures including the 4 chapters. Chapter 1, global fisheries and seafood securities. Chapter 2 is Korean fisheries and aquaculture. This part is main part of today's lecture. And chapter 3 is Korean fisheries, management and policies. And chapter 4 is very special chapter about the Korean overseas fisheries. These overseas fisheries cases is not the normal in other countries, including Timor's cases. And this overseas fisheries in Korea was developed in early 1950s. And that time, Korean industry was mainly in focus on fisheries. So at that time, this overseas fisheries is very important role to develop the Korean fish industries. So let's move to chapter 1. Chapter 1 is 2 parts. One is global fisheries and seafood security, and other part is programs in global fisheries. So we are talking about the in the fish industry. It's a very complicated part, including the capture and the culture and the processings and the processing of some kind of many different part of some technology part, and also including the price part. And that is the market consumers, how we're doing with this. Today we are focused on how this industry is developed by the fish in the sea and the market in consumption areas together. That is one of main focus on global issue. So let me talking about what is the matter in the fish industries. There are 5 parts. The first part is the food and nutrition. So maybe everybody in here is understanding clearly how important of fisheries for humans, the food and nutrition. And to see in this slide, there are 70% of animal proteins. This is global averages. I think some countries is more than this, but some countries less of them. And also in per capita consumptions, global average is 20.4 kilograms. So this kind of the trend is increasing trend globally. Maybe we can see in later in slide. And Korea is I think is the per capita consumption is the 58 kilograms. I think it's almost twice of the global averages. Also, we are including the essential the fatty and acid and the macrobiotic part. That is including in many developed countries to see. And the next part is what is the fishes matters in globally. There are livelihood and employment. The many countries, including Timor's, like in Korea, we have many the fishing communities. So they have very important part of the global development. And how we increasing the livelihood of the fishermen and also the employment. How many people is working in the fish sector? You can see in here is maybe the 56 millions in primary sector in 2014, but 2019, I think almost 60 millions in working in fish part. So that meaning is the fish industries, most developed countries, the employment part is a very important part. We already explained about that. And you can see in next slide in trade. So trade is a very important part of how we think about in the fish industry development. And I think globally more than 60% of total catches trade between countries and among the countries, the same of, and mostly you see here is second lines, and 60% of exports by quantity, and 54% by values from developing countries. So now we see it in many countries in developing area. So the most of the export, major countries in export is developing countries. And most of the developed countries become import countries. We say market countries, something like that. And also we can see here is there are so many part of including in the capture and also culture and inland or some marine part. And many things we understand that very clearly. And the capture is almost stable, even though the culture is increased. So there is sometimes we think about how we the balance between the supply and demand in market. And that is why we need to develop the culture, because the capture is almost stable, but the consumptions or demand in market is increased. So there are no way to increasing of the seafood. Only we are focused on the culture. That is why in recently many countries develop the culture. And also the same in here is the slide we see here. The capture is almost stable. The same up in the future. So how we increase of seafood? So there's only the culture is but the culture also have I think many problems. We already know about some environmental or some feed or some disease. So how we think about in the future, the culture is continuously increasing or not. So in this part is many things we are including, even though we see the capture is almost stable, but the population and the consumption is increased. So what is the food supplies is increased by culture, but still we will have some, the main problems is in here. We are focused on non-food use. Maybe we have something to culture, and we are think about the feed problems. Many of the countries in the culture, the feed from the capture. So that is a quite complex systems in globally. So we are maybe we are talking about in later in Korean side. And also what think about in here is the stock biomass. I mean the resources are almost fully developed. So there are no ways to increasing capture because of most of the main species is overexploited. And you can see in this slide from FAO. And also some scientists is worried about, because many countries, the catches is already the overexploited, and the capacity is quite high levels, and the resources declining over the next decades. And then maybe we using the same amount of fishing boat and the fishing capacity, and then we lost all the stock size. So that is what we are worried about in the future, how we dealing with this kind of problem in globally. And let's go to next slide. And that is one thing we are considering about in globally. We see this slide, and most of maybe there are some parts not clear. We have three parts. Most high level is developed countries, the capture. And second is the green part is developing countries. And finally, the most of the black side is China. And I think it's one of thinking about how amount of the catches among these three parts. And most developed countries, the capture is not changes. It's maybe 1/3 of global catches. And also we are thinking about the developing countries. And that is like some part of maybe, we don't know exactly how amount, but the China is most of high levels of capture. So that is what we are considering about in the future, how global fishery is going on, and among these three parts of later we are discussion. And this slide is so before I talking about the average per capita consumptions of seafood, and you can see in clearly the per capita consumption is increased over times, and you see in this kind of increasing trend is make some problems because the capture is almost stable. Even we have culture is increased, but this per capita consumption is increased over times. And then we are considering about the how balance between supply and demand in market. So that makes some problem of seafood industry in globally. And now we are seeing in here is capture and the culture. The culture is already the more than more capture in consumption part, and from 2014, and that is what we are considering about culture. But culture have some problems of in here is one problem is the because this is the culture in slide you saw in here is three part. One is yellow part is developed countries the volume of culture, and second part is all the other developed countries, and last part is China. So in China and the developed countries, the culture is very increasing trend. You can see very clearly. But the problem is, you see in yellow part is culture from developed countries. You see, developed countries, the culture, the volume is not changes from 1990s to 2000 or 2020s, whatever. Almost the same amount of culture. So that is why we are concerned about the culture. Even the culture, we are not sure in the future, maybe the 20 or 50 years later, still culture is increasing or not. But we have very negative, because we see in developed countries in the yellow part is not changes amount of culture because of the culture is quite limited by environmental capacity. So still the developed countries and China has have enough the environmental capacity. So that's why increasing the culture. But developed countries, there the culture, the environmental carrying capacity is already full. So there are no the potential the increase of the culture. That's why we are worried about in the future how the culture is increasing or not. So, but anyhow, so we are considering about the in market situations. The steel consumption is increased. You mean we need more supply, but because demand is increased over time by increase of consumptions of it, and then the catches in capture fisheries part is already the stable, that changes. So we need more the seafood from aquaculture. So aquaculture have one of the solutions to solve the imbalance between the supply and demand in market. So this is like many countries in recently just focus on how to develop the aquaculture. But in here is we are think about in the future, maybe 20 years, 50 years later. So we are still the increase of culture or not, and that is maybe we are the discussions maybe later about that. But the culture is very important for many countries, and because of how increase of seafood. Because capture is already stable. There are only one way is to increasing seafood by aquaculture. So maybe some developed countries or developed, but whatever in every global areas, the same trend of culture development. And the next step is what is the issue in capture fisheries? Because we say before, the capture global the level is almost stable, so not changes because of the stock biomass is already declining trend, but still we have many boats. The fishing capacity is too high. You see here there are many angles, and many the fishermen, they want to catch more and more. So, but in fishing ground, the resources are already declining. So how we'll do? So that is one of a big issue globally. I mean, we say too many boats in many countries compared to the stock biomass or resource status. And that is one of some issue in here, you can see. And also in this slide, so because the last few decades, how each countries developed the fish industries. So how they develop the fishing gear and method. So develop every years, and last few decades, the fishing gear and the fishing method is developed very high levels, and now the fishing capacity, the catch ability is very high levels, and that makes some problems. It's maybe some countries already realized of this kind of high technologies to develop. That makes some problems, and then many countries like in Japan and some other developed countries, they want to remove the high level of technology in capture area. Some examples, we want to remove in easy area of trawl. Trawl is most developed the fishing technologies, high productivities. So they want to remove trawl in easy. So those kind of thing is one of the issue in globally. So we must know about that clearly. And then you see here in screens, there are many different type of the fishing methods. How we using some example, catch tuna, to using purseine and the long lines. So long line is good to catch tunas in environmental friendly. We say long line is good, but most countries catch tunas by purseine, like in Korea. So purseine is, I think it's a good technology to catch tunas, but we will have many problems of overfishings and from purseine fishing technologies. And anyhow, so we already have the problem of fishing technologies. You can see in screens there are many different type of the fishing methods, and what the problem with this kind of method to last a few decades in global fisheries. And next slide, but the same of we can see here, like in the purseine and the trawl. So how amount of catches? One using some trawl and one using the purseine. So this kind of fishing technology is quite good. But on the other hand, we lost the stock size. So that is what happened last few decades in many countries. Those kind of the fishing, the technology development make some problem of some collapse or some overexploitation or some depletions. So there are, we say, overcapacity, and then we will have some problems. And finally, those kind of development, high technologies to vacuumings, and you see in screen. So many the fishing methods are vacuuming the sea. So there are no fishes. And then you can see in this slide, it's from FAO the data, and many, I think it's less than 20% is remaining to develop more, but I think the more than 75% is the fishes is already the overexploited, and this kind of trend is more seriously than before. So that is we will have some problem globally. I think most countries the same about this kind of problem. And then this is one thing we are considering about there are two graphs. One is the the polex in Korea. And last few decades, the polex is one of major species in Korea. But recently, the catch is nothing. And that is, we say, collapsed. So there are no polex in eastern part of Korea. So nowadays still we are stopped to catch the polex in, I think, around 2000. But still the polex is not here, not the recover. So once we lost the stock, it is very difficult to recover. So that is one of the example in here in Korean polex in eastern part of Korea. So we lost the polex, and that is we are considering about to develop fish industries. And also there are some just in some other collapses. Atlantic cod. Atlantic cod is collapsed in 1994. So still the fish is not recover, and we will have some problems how develop those kind of stock biomass. And also we are including many the main species globally. The stock is already collapse. So there are three different types of the collapse. The reason why is the collapse. There are one of overfishings and one of climate changes. One species cases, we don't know exactly what the reasons the resource collapse. And that is something to consider in here. Why the resource is declining over times, and the same of in Timoros and Korea. So we have 4 different causes to find out in here. Maybe we can find many other factors, some example climate changes. But we see here is one is overfishing, and the second one is highly efficient technology. I already mentioned about how developed technologies make some problem of the resource depletions. And the third one is bycatches, and the last one is overcatches. Too many boats. And these 3 and the 4 part is the mainly what we understanding why the resource is declining. And that is quite difficult to understand in bycatch here, and high efficient technologies, and also overfishings. So many countries, the fishermen, they try to catch more and more. And that is something to know about some part. And then we find many countries, like Timor and Korea are the same. The fishes, the size becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. So those kind of trend is quite common globally. So the fishes become smaller and smaller. So that makes some problem already. And also many countries to manage our fisheries, like in overfishing or overexploitation or overcapacities. So many problems, but the mostly difficult to solve these kind of problems because of, you see here, the marine ecosystems is very complicated. So we don't know. So what we have information and the knowledge is for marine ecosystems, the information is quite small to make good decisions. So this is make something to problem of in here is we see the mismanagement. Many countries like Korea, we spend a lot of time to manage our fisheries, to control the fishing effort, and also catches, and also some other bycatch or the illegal fishings, whatever. But most countries fails because we say the mismanagement is possible to come. And those kind of things is maybe, I don't know, in some countries. Some example, this is the salmon, the capture in Canada. You see in the fishing ground, there are too many boats to catch it in salmons simultaneously, the same fishing ground. So those kind of things is we can see everywhere in globally. And we say too many boats, and how the government manage of those kind of fisheries. But it's almost impossible because there are many things. What we have is not enough to make the correct decisions to dealing with the problems in the fish sector. And the same up here is we see there are some bycatches, and also there are some problem in aquaculture's part, and also there are some high developed technologies part in here, and also there are some all these things is still going on. You can see in this slide, there are many the area of global, all the fishing ground, and the catch is declining. And that meaning is there are too many the capacities to catch in more and more. So last few decades, the whole area of global, some example in China and Korea and Japan, and also Indian area, also Atlantic area in the United States and South America area, including some America or Africas. So all part, the fishing ground is resource declining, so catch is declining. So that meaning is last few decades, the stock biomass or resource is already overexploited. So that is happened in globally the last few decades. I think including in Timoros and Korea is the same. And the same up here in many countries, many fisheries, and you can see, and the seas, the empty oceans. There are no fishes, and also empties in net. So the catch is declining over time. The same up in Korea, we can see in chapter 2. And those things is what think about the in globally, and those kind of the things how we know about the most of countries to develop the fish industries, and FAO have many these things to solve the global issues what we see in this in chapter 1, and to see here is the empty oceans that makes some problem of the future industries in the fishery sector, and how we encourage of the capture fisheries in globally. And this is like in one ways to working all member countries in FAO together to solve the problem in the fish sector, and how to encourage of the fishermen to conserve resource to develop fisheries industry in the countries. And that makes something to we are working to go. And the same up here is the red part is like in the fishing ground is already overexploited, and you can see clearly to make sense. And why the fishing ground all of the world is resources overexploited, and I think it's too many boats. Why fishermen want to catch more and more? They know about in the fishing ground, the fish stock is already overexploited. Why they want to catch more and more? So this is a global happening, and that is why in chapter 1 we make some issue how we know in globally what problems we will have in the fishery sector, and this is very important part of to see. Okay, so chapter 1 is very important to both the Timor and the Koreans, how we the fish industry develop in the future. In Timor also, I think it's the same the problems what we already mentioned in chapter 1, and the same over in Korea. We have almost the same problems what the see in chapter 1. We see very clearly overfishings and overcapacities, and also most fishermen is too low incomes, and also most countries they try to develop the aquaculture to make some balance between supply and demand in market. But we should have some problems in aquaculture, especially in Korea. Maybe in chapter 2, I explain about the culture in Korea. It's many problems we have. Maybe I don't know in tomorrow cases to develop the culture, maybe the same problem of in Korea. So before we start chapter 2, so we will make some 5-minute breaks. Thank you for chapter 1. So after 5 minutes, we will start in chapter 2.